everyone. So today I'm going to make a very interesting video on Terraform, and I keep getting a lot of questions about what's the right approach to create and work with projects on Terraform. So for most of the people who already have been familiar with the Terraform, they know what the Terraform is. For people who have no idea of the Terraform, so Terraform is basically a used for in is called basically as one of the tool for the infrastructure as a code. So idea with the infrastructure as a code is that as a DevOps engineer, you might be creating a lot of infrastructure, the complicated infrastructure. Hey, I want to put a load balancer. I want to put, let's say, three elastic, elastic computing, instances with them. Or probably you might be utilizing, hybrid cloud infrastructure, or you might be using some multi-cloud infrastructure. You might be using a complicated, infrastructure, having multiple RDS, having multiple load balancers and stuff like that. Now, one of the crazy problem with that, which we have already seen so far, is that even if you have created the infrastructure, if you want to replicate the infrastructure into a new place, or if you want to make a changes in the infrastructure, it becomes too much of complications to handle that. So the best way is to write code. Now, and I know that most of you who comes from a non-coding background might be kind of afraid of writing codes. But Terraform is very easy to write code. So it's like, couple of, you know, informations already given into the documentation. You just start, looking into documentation, copy paste the stuff, get the things done. Some commands are here, and we are done with that. But one of the interesting fact is like what is actually the right way to start with the Terraform. So this video is not going to about what is Terraform and the basics of the Terraform, but this video is more about what's the right approach to create a Terraform project, especially when you have a multi-environment. So for people who don't know multi-environment, so when you actually go across and start creating the infrastructure, you will be forced to create infrastructure like, hey, I am going to have a dev infrastructure, I'm going to have probably a staging infrastructure, I probably am going to have a production infrastructure, right? Or probably a dev infrastructure and production infrastructure. So multiple infrastructure is there, and you kind of have to manage those infrastructure, create those infrastructure in a very smart manner. Maybe in the dev infrastructure you have used less resources than what about the production infrastructure and stuff like that. And the best part about the Terraform is, it maintains a state, which means, let's say, if you created some of the infrastructure, let's say two instances, and if you want to make changes onto one of the instances, you can quickly make the changes onto those instances, and Terraform will keep a tab of all the changes has been made. One of the important part which I was talking with a couple of junior DevOps engineer. They were like, they created the infrastructure with Terraform, and then they modified the some of the values by going onto the AWS console. So they were having a cloud infrastructure on the AWS, uh, and they basically went back onto the AWS console and modified it. This is something which you should never ever do that. So if you have created the infrastructure using Terraform through code, if you want to make some changes, you make the changes through the Terraform itself. Don't go ahead and do all those, physical modifications. I mean, the manual modification in this case, right? So idea is like, how do you structure the entire, Terraform project? So this is going to be a video on those. So for the video purpose, we are going to have two environment. One is going to be a dev environment, and the other is going to be a production environment. And we are kind of like going to use we'll basically using EC2 instances to kind of create the infrastructure. So probably if you want, you can have like one EC2 instance in a dev, two EC2 instances on the production based upon your requirement. But something that is we're going to use it. For people who already know, there are some file structure that we create. So we have all the files that you write in the Terraform ends with extension called as .tf. So .tf basically defines that, hey, it's a Terraform file. We also have a TFR files. So these are basically a configuration files. So we store the configuration values into these TFRs file. So that is basically it. So this is like the more file structure which is there. Now come sorry, I mean the extension structure that we are basically going to use it. Then, apart from that, the file structure, there are going to be a basic file structure that we always have to keep on, understanding. So, main.tf is always going to be an entry file for the Terraform project. So, it's always the main.tf from where the project starts. We have, something called as the variables.tf, which is where we store all the variables. We have the outputs, .tf, where we kind of like store all the outputs. There are a couple of other files that we want. If you want to store some versions, we can have like versions.tf, providers.tf, you know. And for the resources, you can name any file name. Let's say I want to have like ec2 instance.tf, right? You can start naming those particular files based upon your requirement. But general suggestion is that whenever you are making a resources file as well, you try to make it with the name of that. For example, if I'm using an EC2 instance from the AWS, I would love to name it as the EC2 underscore instance.tf, because it is easier for me to understand that hey, this piece of file consists of the code which is all about the EC2 instance, or not any bullshit things which is inside it. So one of the important part about it. So taking these informations, right, we'll go across and work on a simple project structure. We'll see how the project structure goes across, and things are right. So for my example, I am taking my cloud infrastructure is the AWS. Okay. And remember, Terraform is just used for, creating the cloud infrastructure, and it's not for the configuration. So even if you want to work with the AWS, infrastructure, you need to have the AWS CLI configured, installed, and it should be configured. So you need to have AWS configure executed, and your all the secret key, and everything should be configured properly here. So if it is not configured, first my suggestion is that you go across and configure it over there, and then work around with that. So anyway, let's go ahead and start that. So in my case, I personally don't have Terraform. So if you see, if I actually open my Terraform version, you'll find out that Terraform is exactly at least not present here. So objective would be like, let's go ahead and install the Terraform first. So I'll just going to search for Terraform install. Okay, so let's go to a, official repository of a Terraform. And if you find out there is, so I am using a Windows laptop. So, um, no, not the Docker one. I'll probably go with the native installation. Okay, so there is a installation. So there is like a manual installation on the Windows if you want to try it out, right? Where you can download some of the file which is already present, basically, and then you can use it. Or the other one is like you can use a simple Choco to install it, right? So I'll just copy this up, okay, and open my repository, open my command line, and we'll install the Choco. So okay, so it's like okay, so I'm just running a command Choco install Terraform, easier, and it should okay. So this says access to a path. Okay, so I have not opened my bash program, so I need to open it with a PowerShell, Windows PowerShell with an admin permission. Okay, perfect. Now let's go ahead. So permission issues. Uh, why it's not green? Okay, never mind. Okay, looks like I had some old Terraform plugin in my laptop. Never mind. It's downloading the Terraform for a bit, and this is basically going to install. Okay, looks like the installation of the Terraform was done successfully. So let's go ahead and look for Terraform version. Okay, so if you're actually looking into this, which means your Terraform is perfectly installed, and now we can proceed with the Terraform command, and we can proceed with that. Okay, so I already have created a folder called as Terraform project. In this particular folder, we are basically going to work around, with our Terraform. So for that, I'll just open and write a piece of code into Visual Code Studio, which you know how much I love it, right? Okay, so before starting out the project, we'll go and install one of the extension called as the Terraform, right? So I love one of the thing about the Visual Code Studio is its plugin. It makes life so easy. So I'll just go ahead and install the plugin. Good for providing up the highlighting the syntax and the auto completion. I kind of mess up with my syntax a lot. Okay, that being said, so I think looks like my extension is already there. So now I can simply go ahead and start with my project. Now, as I was mentioning about the way that I'm supposed to write my piece of code is that I'm going to have a environment, right? I'll have a dev environment and I'll have a production environment. This is going to be my, two environment which I'm supposed to create, right? Very important. Just update it afterwards. Okay. And I'm going to use the EC2 instances for that matter, which is important, right? So these are a couple of information which we need to keep in mind, and then we will go ahead and create it. And the other thing was like, I basically had to make sure that, my AWS has been configured. So if you have not configured, you can install the AWS CLI. And then if you just run the AWS configure, it will be like, hey, have you configured it or not? So if you look something like this, and if you have configured it perfectly fine, then, it's just going to work. Okay, perfectly fine. So let's go ahead and start with that. I'll just clean mine. Okay. First of all, I am going to create a project structure. Since I need environment, two environments. I'm first going to have a environments folder. Okay, and inside the environments folder, I'm going to have two different folder. One is going to be my dev folder for the dev environment, and I'm going to have a production folder for the production environment. Then I'm going to have a modules, right? I'll just have not inside the environment, but modules. So modules will consist of all the modules that we want to create. For example, we'll create separate modules for EC2 instances. For all the resources that we want to create, we keep on having a separate module. So for example, if I wanted to create an EC2, so I'll create another one, like another folder called as EC2, and I'll just start putting up all the codes and everything, all the files related with the EC2 instances into this particular modules, and we'll keep on calling those particular modules in the dev and product production. That basically gives us a power that we don't really need to keep on writing that EC2 resources again and again, no matter how many times on how many environments that we create. So that's the power of the modules which we always talk about. And then we understand that we are going to need some of the shared files. So obviously I'm going to have the shared files. Now this is something which is the very basic ones that we start off with. So I'm just going to have, I know, like we are going to have a versions file, versions.tf, which I'm going to use, and I'm going to use another providers.ts. Okay, so these are two files I'm going to kind of need. So if you if you look into Terraform, this is perfectly fine. Okay, I just checked it like if my syntax and auto completion is kind of like working on. Okay, so let's go back to our Terraform, and let's look into the documentation. So I'm pretty sure Terraform providers. Okay, so there is Terraform providers. Okay, so this is like a documentation. My bad. Let's go to the registry of the Terraform. It somehow is not working. Okay, it's working now fine. Okay, so I have this Terraform registry, and since I know that I'm going to use the AWS, so I'll go to my AWS, and here you can find out the provider is there, right? So all the provider and everything is, already specified over here. Okay, so this is something I'm going to use it for people who wants to, kind of know about that. If you need any, AWS instance, let's say, I think AWS instance. So do we have resources for the AWS EC2 instances? Okay, I can see. So you can see, like you can look for any of the EC instances that you want to have it from the left hand side, right? And that can give you, so for example, you want an S3, you want an RDS, you just keep on looking for it, and documentation will basically help you out with that. In my case, okay, so I just like showed you how to use it. Over here, if you find out, this is the basic information which is there, right? So this one, which you're looking at, the first piece of code, which is inside the Terraform block, where it provides a couple of information and the versions of it. This is what the versions.tf code basically consists of. And the provider is basically talking about here that I'm basically going to use a AWS provider. So I'm basically having a provider block which is going to talk about the AWS. Okay, now over here we can actually go ahead and specify the provider that we want to write. Right. So for example, we'll specify the region of AWS which we want to have. So totally up to you which region you want to put into. So let's say I think like you can simply go to so let's say I'm just going to work on the Mumbai region. That's a default region for me. So I don't want to make a mistake, especially not in the spelling of South one and stuff. Okay, so I have specified my providers. I've specified the versions. That looks pretty much good. Then we kind of need to have a EC2 instance. So this is where we are basically going to create the project structure for the EC2, the modules that we want to create. So every module, whenever you want to create any module, every module will have at least three files. One is going to be a main.tf, right? The other file is basically going to be a variables.tf, and then we are basically going to have outputs.tf. Okay, so three files. We're going to have main, variables, outputs. Then again, when we go back to our the environments, okay, let's say about the dev environment. I'm going to create a main.tf, right? I'm going to create a variables.tf, right? And I'm going to create a terraform.tf vars. So terraform.tf is exactly the file which I was talking about, which consists of all the configurations, the configurational values that we want to put across, for that particular environment we are going to put across inside our terraform.tf files. So similarly for the production as well, we are going to have the same structure main.tf. We'll have like a variables.tf, and then we'll be basically we have terraform.tf vars, right? So this becomes my entire structure, right? So we'll start by writing out the models. Now, just in case if you need more environment, you can have the more environments, more environment just like this. Okay, but for us, this is mostly like resources. So if you need more resources, let's say, hey, I want to have more resources like uh, you know an S3 resource, you can have like an S3. Okay, and inside that you can keep on creating the files just like how we created it for the EC2 instances. Okay, anyway, not to elongate too much, we go on to the EC2 and we focus on the EC2. So the main.tf will consist of the resources. We are going to talk about the resource block, and this is going to be the AWS instance. So how do I actually know about the AWS instances? If you look into, and as I was mentioning about this, you can actually find out in the documentation itself, especially on the resources side, where you have the EC2 and you see the resources, and the resource type is the AWS instance. This is the instances where you can actually specify the AWS instances, and these are a couple of values which you can actually go ahead and create, right? So this basically looks like what the values is all about. Let's say we have an AMI, we have an instance type, and things around it. So if you want, we can actually go ahead and create it. Okay, totally up to you. How do you want to name this as? Okay. Anyway, so now we're not going to use this. We're basically going to take this from the variable. So all these things are basically going to be part from the variables. Okay, whatever these values are that we are basically looking at, we'll be taking these things from the variables. So those things we are going to define inside our variables. Okay, so let's go ahead and go to our variable, and we'll be defining the pretty much the variables. Okay, so for the purpose, I am going to open two windows so that I can keep a tab of what variables I'm looking to create, right? So I need to create a variable of AMI, right? So this is one variable I need to have. Now, while creating any variable, we need to define the description. What this is, what's the description about this particular variable? Gives a good idea about, we can track what this variable is all about. So this is AMI to use for the AC2 instance, right? And then we are going to specify the type, right? So this is going to an the type string. Now if you are writing everything into one particular file, or it was a very closed structure, it was not about the environment and stuff, probably you would also go ahead and specify the default and all. But in our case, since we are basically creating this as a modules, okay, so we are just defining the type of it. Okay, so once you have defined, let's save this. You can now call that var.ami here. Okay, so similarly, we'll go across and we'll define the another one, which is going to be our instance type. Okay, so similarly, write a description, and the description, this is of the EC2 instances, right? Here, this instance type is about like T2 micro, whether we want to have T3, micro and stuff like that. So you can define those instance type here. Again, this is going to be a type string. So we define the type string. We also have a variable called as a name here. I can look into it, right? Or probably, okay, we are going to pass on this particular variable called as a name. So let's go ahead and use this description, and so this is my name tag. Okay, so and again this is going to be a type string. Okay, once you have done, we'll just go and call this. Okay, and that's it. Okay, done, pretty much. Okay, so we have defined models, but we still, let's say we want to talk about the the outputs as well. Okay, totally up to you. Like, what kind of output do you want, to get it. Okay, for the basic example, let's say like, hey, we would like to have the instance ID output, right? Instance underscore ID as an output. Okay, so you can write value, and this is going to be AWS instance.web because this is what we have defined, right? And if I look into the ID, there's a lot always an ID. This is the reason, like, when you install the Terraform extension into Visual Code Studio, it becomes very, very easy for you to work around with that. Okay, so now that we have more or less we have created the modules, we are pretty much happy with that. We can actually move on to create a development environment. Okay, so in the development environment, this is the point where we are basically going to have our development environment. Okay, now I can just go across and close this, and I'll simply move on to the dev environment. So we already know that we have defined the module inside my EC2. So we are basically going to call this particular module, and I'm going to name that particular module as, let's say, EC2 for dev. Okay. So we are basically going to call this module, and I'm going to define from which place this particular module is going to be. So the source is like, I'm just specifying the source file path. So if you see the EC2, so right now I'm inside the main.tf. If I put a double dot, I'll just go in my environments folder. If I again put a double dot, I go inside the main root folder. And then if I put the modules, I go inside the modules, and then EC2 and stuff. Then I'm going to specify the AMI of this, right? That is one thing. I'll just have the instance type, and I'm just going to specify the instance type as well. Okay. Remember, I need to define all of these things inside my value, right? So dot. Okay, either we can actually provide this, or we can simply just, it's just not mandatory, like, to actually create it. You can also go ahead and provide the values here itself. So, but it's a, good idea that we can also put some of the informations here as well. Just an idea, like, that it works both ways. So, for example, if you have already defined it here, and we can actually go and just create an empty variables. Okay, we don't really need to create a variable or the values with it. Okay, now I can see we don't have any more underlining factor. So what we are basically doing is, like, we wanted to store these critical information not in the part as part of the code. The reason is that we tend not to push these TFR into my GitHub repository. Now, if you understand, if you come from a development background, you have probably worked with a .env file, which is a good for the security. We never push the .env file into our GitHub repository because it consists of the sensitive information like the database credentials, some secret values and stuff like that. Similarly, when we actually work with the Terraform file, you need to put some critical information. So maybe it can be a password, maybe it can be some of the configuration information which you would not like that those informations are pushed into a GitHub repository, and that is exactly where the Terraform.tfrs come into play. So idea is that probably that in my case I didn't wanted to put my AMI and the instance type. When I'm basically going to push this my entire repository, I'm never going to put my Terraform.tf vars into a GitHub repository, right? So definitely in my Git repository, in my Git ignore, I'm going to specify that, hey, I never push .tfvars file. I'm just going to ignore that particular thing. So that is one of the reason, like, why we actually use the TFVAR files to store the configuration. Probably very, very good for the information. But as you can see, like, it's not always mandatory. For example, name, I'm not too much worried. Even if people know about the name, it's anyway going to be a a dev environment and an EC2 instance that we are using. So not too much of the problem here, right? Anyway, so let's say, we know that AMI and the instance type, which is something which we already are going to define in my Terraform. So if you go across, write that AMI, and we'll be writing the AMI for it, and also the instance type that we are basically going to specify. Let's say I'm going to specify the T3 micro for it. And for the AMI, let's go back to our here. We search for AMI. Okay, let's search for AMI or AMI catalog. Okay, we'll figure it out. Let's search for the AMI catalog. Okay, AMI catalog it is. Okay, I'm going to look for one two image, one two, and that too, like 22.04. So if you look for this 1 to 20.04, and this is the AMI image which I'm looking for, which uses the x86 texture, skill Intel chip for it. Okay, I'll just copy this up, paste it. Voila! Finally, my instance has been created. Similarly, you will be doing exactly the same thing for the production environment as well. So let's say if you go across and if you just push this up, I'm just going to copy paste the thing. See, okay, let's say in my production I need a bigger machine, but I'll just go with that it's small. All right, so I will have a different instance type for it, right? So these are a couple of okay, my bad, like it's not in dev, it's going to be a prod instance. Okay, so now this is my complete project structure which I have already created it for it. Now the question comes across, Prashant, how are you going to execute it? Right? You have two different environments. Okay, and how are you going to quickly execute it? So in order to execute it, unfortunately, you can say, like, and I just have to go into that respective folders and then execute it. It has not been saving this file. Okay, I have to make sure that if files are not saved, then those informations are not there, and it'll throw an error while executing it, even if the code is there. Uh, so just have to include the Terraform init command, and it will finally go. So the whole idea is that we need to actually go inside the dev folder. So whatever the environments that we created, we just have to go into that particular environment folder and then execute that command. So for example, we are now trying to execute it for the dev environment. We went inside the dev environment and I'm executing with that. Similarly, if you have to go inside the and you have to include, like, execute it for the production environment, you'd probably definitely go inside the production environment and then execute it. So once you have done, you can actually run the Terraform plan command. So once you run the plan command, it will basically, like, show you the entire planning and everything for the Terraform. So wait for it. It will take some few minutes of time, and then it will kind of, like, show it in the architecture, because the first time when it's trying to execute, it's trying to create the state of it, and kind of like, it will maintain the entire state and everything inside the dev folder itself. Similarly, you guys can go ahead and try to do the same thing for the the in production one, and let me know how does it work out. Okay, finally we made it. Okay, now if I just go ahead and apply the Terraform apply, and then we can, like, again, it will take some time, and um, create the entire infrastructure that we wanted to create. So that's all for this particular video, in which we talked about how can we actually create a proper structured Terraform project. So this is like how you actually maintain various environments, maintain the different modules. Why don't you just go ahead and create some more, complex project structure, and let me know how does it work out for you. See you in the next video. Bye bye. Take care.